The great hall of the convocation stretched across 3 dimensions that most species could not properly see. Crystal pillars rose from floors that shifted like living water, and light came from everywhere and nowhere at once. For 10,000 cycles, the most advanced minds in the galaxy had gathered here to study the universe and write down everything they learned. The crystalline archivists floated near the ceiling, their bodies made of living glass that sang when they communicated. The probability weavers occupied the eastern section, their forms constantly shifting as they calculated futures that had not yet happened. The void shepherds, ancient beings made of pure gravity and darkness, sat in the deepest shadows, watching everything with senses that did not require eyes. These were the elder species. They had existed when the galaxy was young. They had watched stars be born and die. They had every force, every energy, every measurable thing in the cosmos. Nothing surprised them anymore. Until the humans arrived. Doctor stood at the entrance of the great hall, feeling very small. She was 43 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and tired lines around her eyes. Back on Earth, she had been a professor at the New Geneva Institute. Here, among beings who had mastered the fabric of reality itself, she felt like a child who had wandered into a room full of giants. The invitation had arrived 6 months ago, transmitted through channels that humanity had not even known existed. The convocation of stellar minds was requesting a human representative. Specifically, they wanted someone who could explain certain energy readings that their instruments had detected coming from human worlds. The readings made no sense to the convocation. They matched no known phenomenon. They seemed to come from humans themselves, but not from their bodies or their technology. The energy came from something else, something the elder species could not identify. Had been chosen because she specialized in how humans processed loss. She studied grief. A crystalline archivist drifted toward her, its glass body chiming softly. The translation device in its ear converted the sounds into words she could understand. You may approach the speaking platform, human delegate. The convocation is ready to receive your presentation. Walked forward, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. She carried a small black box under her arm. Inside were recordings she had collected over 20 years of research. Recordings of funerals, recordings of memorials, recordings of people crying, speaking, remembering those they had lost. She had no idea if any of it would make sense to beings who had never truly died, who had never truly lost anyone. The speaking platform was a circle of light in the center of the hall. Stepped into it and felt the gentle hum of translation technology activating around her. Whatever she said would be converted into forms that every species present could understand. She looked out at the gathered assembly. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species, all of them ancient, all of them powerful, all of them watching her with what she could only interpret as curiosity. "Thank you for inviting me," began. Her voice sounded strange in the vast space, small but somehow amplified. "I understand you have detected unusual energy readings from human populations. I believe I can explain what you are measuring." She opened the black box and activated the first recording. The sound that filled the hall was simple. It was a woman crying. Not screaming, not wailing, just the quiet, broken sound of someone who had lost everything and did not know how to continue living. "This is Maria Santos," said. 6 years ago, her daughter died in the Martian dust storms, was 7 years old. This recording was made at her memorial service." The crystalline archivists chimed softly to each other. The probability weavers shifted uneasily. But it was the void shepherds who reacted most strongly. The ancient beings of gravity and darkness seemed to draw closer, their attention focused entirely on the small human speaker. Continued. "When humans lose someone they love, something happens inside them. We call it grief. It is not just sadness. It is not just pain. It is a complete restructuring of how we understand reality. The person we loved was part of our world. When they are gone, the world itself feels broken. She played another recording. This time it was a man speaking at a funeral. His voice kept breaking, cracking, falling apart. He would stop, breathe, try again. He was trying to describe who his wife had been. He was trying to put into words something that words could not contain. David lost his wife to the collapse, said. They had been married for 31 years. When she died, he told me that he felt like half of his soul had been torn away. The instruments around the speaking platform began to flicker. Did not notice at first. She was focused on her presentation, on trying to explain something that the elder species had never experienced. But the probability weavers noticed. Their forms shifted rapidly as their calculation matrices began to overload. What you are detecting in human populations, continued, is the energy signature of grief. It is not a technology. It is not something we control. It is simply what happens when a human being loses someone they love and continues to exist without them. She played a third recording, a father standing at a memorial for his daughter. His voice was steady at first, controlled. He talked about her childhood, her dreams, her smile. And then his voice broke. The control shattered. And what came out was something raw, something primal, something that seemed to come from a place deeper than words. Every instrument in the great hall overloaded simultaneously. The crystalline archivists released a cascade of chimes that translated as shock and confusion. The probability weavers collapsed their forms into protective spheres as their prediction matrices failed completely. Even the void shepherds, beings of ancient and terrible power, seemed to recoil from the speaking platform. Stop the recording, startled by the reaction. Is something wrong? A crystalline archivist drifted forward, its glass body now pulsing with colors had never seen before. Human delegate, please remain still. We need to recalibrate our measurement arrays. It took 3 hours for the convocation to restore their instruments to working order. During that time, waited on the speaking platform, confused and increasingly worried. She had not expected her presentation to cause any problems. She had just been playing recordings of people crying. Finally, the senior archivist approached her. Its voice through the translator was careful, measured, but could detect something underneath, something like fear. Doctor, we have completed our. We have also analyzed the energy readings that occurred during your presentation. The results are unprecedented. What do you mean? The final recording you played, the one featuring the father speaking at his daughter's memorial, produced an energy output that our instruments initially classified as impossible. Waited. The reading, the archivist continued, was equivalent to the first millisecond of a supernova explosion. That is the moment when a dying star releases more energy than it has produced in its entire existence. That is the most powerful natural event known to occur in the physical universe. Stared at the archivist, unable to process what she was hearing. That cannot be right. He was just a man crying for his daughter. He was not doing anything. Nevertheless, the measurement is accurate, and more significantly, the energy was not a momentary burst. It was sustained. For as long as the recording played, the energy output continued. The convocation of stellar minds fell into complete silence. Every being in the great hall was focused on the small human woman standing in the circle of light, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. A void shepherd moved forward, its gravitational presence warping the space around it. When it spoke, the translation device struggled to convert its communication into words, but the meaning was clear. Human delegate, this energy you call grief, do all of your species possess it? Thought about Maria Santos crying for her daughter. She thought about David standing at his wife's grave. She thought about every funeral she had ever attended, every memorial she had ever witnessed, every tear she had ever seen shed for someone who was gone. Yes, she said quietly, every human who has ever loved has the capacity to grieve. It is one of the few things that unites us all. The silence that followed was the deepest silence had ever experienced. The convocation of stellar minds, for the first time in 10,000 cycles, did not know what to say. Ambassador Thresh of the Void Shepherds was an ancient being. It had existed before the formation of most planetary systems in the galaxy. It had watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on a cosmic shore. It had studied forces that could tear reality apart and had remained unchanged, unmoved, untroubled. Now, for the first time in millions of cycles, Thresh felt something it could only describe as uncertainty. The convocation had assigned Thresh to lead the investigation into what they were now calling the anomaly. The energy readings from the symposium had been, and there was no mistake, human grief produced power on a scale that rivaled stellar events. Thresh needed to understand why. For 18 galactic standard months, the Void Shepherd embedded itself among human populations. It learned to compress its gravitational form into something small enough to move through human spaces without destroying them. It learned to observe without interfering. It began with funerals. The first one Thresh attended was on a colony world called New Brisbane, in the outer reaches of human-controlled space. A mining accident had killed 12 workers. The colony had gathered in a simple building made of metal and recycled materials to say goodbye. Thresh watched from the back of the room, its presence undetected by human senses. It observed the family members crying. It observed the friends holding each other. It observed the children who did not fully understand why their parents were not coming home. And it felt the energy readings climb. Not as high as the recording at the symposium, but significant, measurable, real. The combined grief of the assembled humans was producing power equivalent to a small fusion reactor, and they had no idea. They were simply feeling their feelings, doing what humans did when they lost someone they loved. Thresh attended more funerals, dozens of them, then hundreds. Each one produced the same basic result: grief created energy. The more profound the loss, the more energy was generated. But it was not just funerals. The Void Shepherd began observing other spaces where grief existed. Hospital waiting rooms, where families prayed for miracles that would not come. Support groups, where people shared their pain with strangers who understood. Quiet bedrooms, where widows and widowers lay awake at night, reaching across empty sheets for warmth that was no longer there. Everywhere humans grieved, energy followed. Thresh reported its initial findings to the convocation, but the report raised more questions than it answered. The energy was not merely emotional discharge. That was too simple an explanation. Something else was happening. After 6 months of observation, Thresh noticed something strange. The energy readings were not random. They followed patterns. When a human grieved, the fabric of spacetime around them bent slightly. The distortion was tiny, almost undetectable, but it was real. Human grief was literally warping reality. Thresh spent another 3 months confirming this observation. The data was unmistakable. When humans experienced profound loss, they generated a localized field of spacetime distortion. The distortion was too small to affect physical objects, but it was not too small to affect probability. The Void Shepherd ran calculations that would have taken lesser beings centuries to complete. What it found disturbed it deeply. Human grief was influencing the outcomes of events around grieving humans, not consciously, not intentionally, but consistently. When humans grieved, improbable things became slightly more probable. Random chance shifted in subtle ways. The universe itself seemed to bend, just slightly, in response to human sorrow. Thresh returned to the convocation with a new report. This time, the findings were even more troubling. According to the data, humanity should have been extinct several times over. Their planet had passed through asteroid fields that should have destroyed them. Diseases had evolved that should have consumed their population. They had developed weapons that should have ended their civilization, yet they had survived every catastrophe. The correlation was undeniable. Every time humanity had faced extinction, their collective grief had reached levels that distorted probability itself. The asteroid that should have struck Earth had been deflected by gravitational anomalies that had no natural explanation. The diseases that should have killed millions had mutated into harmlessness at statistically impossible rates. The wars that should have destroyed them had ended through coincidences that logic. Human grief was protecting them. Their sorrow was so powerful that the universe literally could not let them die. Thresh presented this theory to the assembled convocation, and for the second time in 10,000 cycles, the elder species fell into stunned silence. The crystalline archivists immediately began searching their records, stretching back billions of years. They looked for correlations between human grief events and cosmic phenomena. What they found confirmed Thresh's theory and expanded it in terrifying ways. Every major evolutionary leap in the galaxy had coincided with mass human grief events. Every unexplained cosmic restructuring, every moment when entropy had seemed to reverse itself, every correction in the fabric of reality that had allowed the universe to continue existing, all of them matched periods of profound human loss. The implications were staggering. Human grief was not just powerful, it was structurally necessary. The sorrow of one small species on one small planet had somehow become woven into the fundamental operations of the cosmos. A probability weaver, speaking for the first time since the investigation began, voiced the question that every being in the hall was thinking. If human grief is essential to cosmic stability, what happens if humans stop grieving? What happens if humanity goes extinct? What happens if they evolve beyond loss? No one had an answer, but everyone understood the question. The universe needed human tears, and none of them knew why. The emergency session of the Convocation of Stellar Minds was the largest gathering in the organization's history. Representatives from every member species had traveled across the galaxy to participate. The question before them was unprecedented in scope and gravity. What should the galaxy do with a species whose emotional suffering was apparently essential to cosmic stability? The debates lasted for 3 standard months. The first proposal came from a coalition of younger species who had only recently achieved interstellar travel. They suggested cultivation. Humanity should be encouraged to spread across the galaxy. Their population should be carefully managed to maximize their capacity for grief. Not cruelty, they argued, just efficient resource management. The Void Shepherds rejected this proposal immediately. Thresh, who had spent 18 months among humans, explained that human grief could not be manufactured or controlled. It arose naturally from love and loss. Attempts to manipulate it would produce only pale imitations of the real thing. The energy would be worthless. The second proposal came from the crystalline archivists. They suggested quarantine. Humans should be contained within their current territory, monitored but not interfered with. This would prevent them from learning about their cosmic significance while allowing them to continue their natural cycles of love, loss, and grief. This proposal gained significant support, but it too was eventually rejected. Human expansion was accelerating rapidly. Within a few centuries, they would push against the boundaries of any quarantine zone, and humans were resourceful. They would eventually discover the truth. The third proposal came from the probability weavers. Their suggestion was cold, mathematical, and horrifying. Controlled extinction events. The weavers argued that human grief was most powerful during periods of mass loss. If the goal was to harvest maximum energy for cosmic stability, then humanity should be subjected to carefully calibrated catastrophes. Not total extinction, just periodic die-offs that would produce optimal grief yields. The hall erupted in chaos. Some species supported the proposal on purely practical grounds. Others rejected it as monstrous. The void shepherds to their section of the hall and refused to participate in further discussion. The crystalline archivists fractured into competing factions. For the first time in 10,000 cycles, the convocation of stellar minds was on the verge of collapse. Doctor had remained on the station throughout the debates. She had not been permitted to participate, but she had been allowed to observe. She had watched as the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy discussed her species as if they were livestock. She had watched as ancient beings debated whether to cultivate humanity, contain humanity, or periodically slaughter humanity for cosmic fuel. And she had understood something that none of them seemed to grasp. When the debates reached their most heated point, when it seemed like the convocation might fracture into open conflict, stepped forward and demanded the right to address the assembly one final time. The hall fell silent. The elder species, despite their power and their age, had not forgotten what had happened the last time this human had spoken. Took her place on the speaking platform. And then she did something that none of them had anticipated. She laughed. The sound echoed through the great hall, clear and unexpected. Several species did not even have reference points for laughter. They watched in confusion as the small human woman shook with sounds that their translation devices could not adequately explain. Then she wept. Tears ran down her face, and she made no attempt to hide them. She stood before the assembled minds of the galaxy and cried, openly and without shame. Then she laughed again, tears still streaming from her eyes. "I have been listening to your debates," she said. Her voice was steady now, stronger than it had been at her first presentation. "You have spent 3 months discussing how to manage us, how to use us, how to harvest what we feel." She looked around the hall, meeting the senses of as many beings as she could. "And in all that time, none of you have understood what grief actually is." She activated the black box again, but this time she did not play recordings of sorrow. She played what came after. The first recording was of Maria Santos, the woman who had lost her daughter to the Martian dust storms. But this recording was from 2 years later. Maria was standing in a garden she had built at the colony's memorial site. She was planting flowers that had loved. She was crying, but she was also smiling. "Used to pick these for me," Maria said in the recording. "Every morning before school, I am going to fill this entire garden with them. Everyone who comes here will see them. They will ask about them, and I will tell them about my daughter." Played another recording. David, the man who had lost his wife after 31 years of marriage. But this recording was from 3 years after her death. He was speaking to a group of young people at a university. "My wife believed that every person had something to contribute to the universe," David said. "She spent her entire career helping students find their purpose. When she died, I thought her work died with her, but I was wrong. Her work lives on in everyone she touched, and now, through this scholarship foundation, it will live on in all of you." The instruments remained stable, no energy spikes, no overloads. But something was happening in the hall, something that the measurement arrays could not quantify. "You have measured our grief," said. "You have its energy output. You have theorized about its cosmic significance, but you have missed what it actually is." She stepped closer to the edge of the speaking platform, as if she could close the vast distance between herself and the assembled beings through sheer will. "Grief is not energy. It is not cosmic fuel. It is not a force to be harvested or managed or controlled." Her voice rose, not in anger but in passion. "Grief is love. It is love with nowhere left to go. When we lose someone, the love we felt for them does not disappear. It remains inside us, burning, aching, demanding expression. Every tear we shed is made of that love. Every funeral we hold is shaped by that love. Every moment we spend remembering someone we have lost is an act of love so powerful that it apparently bends the fabric of reality itself." The hall was utterly silent. "You want to know why our grief is so powerful? It is powerful because our love is powerful. We are a species that loves so fiercely, so completely, so irrationally, that when that love is its object, it generates more energy than dying stars. She pulled up the recordings again. Not just Maria and David, but hundreds of others. People building memorials, people establishing foundations, people naming children after those who had passed, people telling stories, people laughing through tears, people refusing to let the dead be forgotten. If our grief shapes reality, it is because we pour everything we have into remembering, into honoring, into building something that means our loved ones did not die for nothing. The convocation's instruments began registering something new, not grief, not the energy they had spent months analyzing, something else, something that existed at the exact opposite end of whatever spectrum grief occupied. You asked what would happen if humanity stopped grieving, what would happen if we evolved beyond loss. Smiled through her tears. We will never evolve beyond loss, because we will never evolve beyond love. The two are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. And as long as we love, we will grieve. And as long as we grieve, we will build. We will create. We will honor. We will transform our pain into purpose. The crystalline archivists were the first to understand. Their glass bodies began singing in frequencies that had not been heard in billions of years. The senior archivist drifted forward, its form pulsing with ancient colors. "We have been measuring the wrong phenomenon," it said. "Grief is powerful because it is the shadow of something even more powerful. We were seeing the shadow and missing the light that cast it." "What is the light?" a probability weaver asked. Thresh, the void shepherd who had spent 18 months among humans, moved forward. Its gravitational presence filled the hall with something that felt almost like warmth. "Hope," Thresh said. "The humans call it hope. It is the belief that loss can be transformed into meaning, that death can give birth to legacy, that love does not end when the beloved is gone." The measurement arrays finally registered the new energy signature. It was everywhere in the hall now, emanating from the small human woman on the speaking platform. It was not as explosive as grief. It was steadier, quieter, more sustained. But its readings were even higher. The convocation of stellar minds had spent 10,000 cycles every force in the universe. They had measured the birth of stars and the death of galaxies. They had energies that lesser species could not even imagine. They had never measured hope. In the cycles that followed, the convocation reached a decision that was unanimous for the first time in its history. Humanity would not be managed. They would not be contained. They would not be cultivated or harvested or controlled. Instead, they would be watched, not with suspicion or fear, but with something approaching reverence. Because any species that could transform loss into legacy, sorrow into solidarity, and grief into the gravitational force that held communities together across the void of space, that species had already discovered something the elder civilizations had forgotten. The universe did not bend around human grief because it needed the energy. It bent because even the cosmos recognized love when it saw it. Doctor returned to Earth 3 years after her first presentation to the convocation. She carried with her a new title, ambassador to the elder species, and a new understanding of what it meant to be human. On her first night home, she visited her mother's grave. She had not been there since before she left for the symposium. She brought flowers, the same kind her mother had planted in their garden when was a child. She knelt beside the headstone and cried, and laughed, and talked to a woman who had been gone for 15 years but who had never really left. Somewhere in the cosmos, instruments registered a tiny fluctuation in the fabric of spacetime, a slight bend in probability, a small but measurable increase in hope. Wiped her eyes, placed the flowers carefully on the grave, and walked home under stars that had been watching humanity all along. The universe could not bear to let them die. because their love was too beautiful, and their grief was too precious, and their hope was the most powerful force the cosmos had ever known.